Good to see you. Good morning, Mark.
Hi, John. How are things?
Good. So today we're going to have a discussion about SDG 16.
Hmm.
So SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. In many ways, I think it might be considered one of the fundamental
Hmm.
SDGs in that, peace and justice are sort of prerequisites if you want to have any sort of meaningful discussions. And if you
Yep.
don't believe that you're going to have justice and strong institutions to enforce them, it's very hard to have any sort of meaningful progress. So I suppose maybe I'd like your thoughts maybe on the importance of the goal to start off and what you
Yeah.
think it has to offer.
No, I agree with you. It is, if you think about it, it's probably one of the most fundamental ones. You have to have peace is a basic prerequisite for any kind of development or any kind of sustainability. The thing about peace, though, sometimes it can be passively understood. So we sometimes think, well, peace equals the absence of conflict or the absence of war. Now, of course, at a certain level, it does. I mean, at the moment, according to the UN, about a quarter of the global population is living in areas affected by conflict. That's really quite extraordinary. That's a quarter of the human population is in some kind of conflict zone. So, at that basic level, for people in that zone, clearly peace is about ending conflict. Um, but peace is also more than that. We're back to a kind of complicated ideas, which is what we understand by violence and force. So there's an old idea to do with understanding violence as not just as it manifests in physical force, but as something that's also institutional or structural. So this is why the SDGs are all integrated. So if you think about violence in that sense, institutional violence, then poverty, inequality, the absence of human rights, degrading of habitat, loss of bioregions, and all of that constitutes violence as well. It's institutionalized violence. In other words, it's the exercise of force, constraining and hampering and limiting and coercing and just constraining people. And that is an institutional violence which affects far more than just a quarter of the global population. I mean, you could argue that almost the entire globe is now incorporated into this experience of being subject to that kind of structural violence, in the sense that there's a degrading of our entire world through inequality and through ecological pressures, so that we're all subject to this. And then sometimes you get a reaction to that, which itself can take a violent form, unfortunately. And then there's a repression to that reaction. And so you get this cycle of violence or a spiral of violence. And so sometimes when we look at peace, we try to think, well, that's when there's no actual conflict going on. But it can make invisible this deeper underlying structural problem. So that's one key thing to understand. So therefore, the commitment to peace, or the commitment to global peace, to nonviolence, is much more than just the absence of war. It's again, it brings into play all the other SDGs, because it brings them into play in terms of reversing this structural experience or this structural problem to do with pressure points on people and on the planet. So I think that's one really big idea. And the second one, before I stop, is what the economists call opportunity cost, um, which is, of course, we can quantify the cost of war primarily in human lives and injury. We can quantify the cost of violence throughout the world, again, in human lives and injury. But the opportunity cost is so massive. So there's the waste of all that human potential. There's the waste of developmental potential in so many countries. Um, but there's also the waste of resources in terms of military spending. So here is the key challenge then. While the SDG, under the SDG, the global governments have committed to global peace, yet in a wonderful Orwellian way, they all armed themselves to the teeth, spending vast sums of money on building up military forces. So, I mean, the last figures I saw was that global spending on military was over $2 trillion, $2,113 billion. The United States alone spending $801 billion on military spending. And it's not just the United States, other countries as well. There's huge amounts of resources being spent on the military. And this is money diverted from other potential things. Like, I mean, if we stopped spending for 1 year, think of the vast sums of money that would be available to do other things, including the transition to sustainability and obviously towards peace. So it's the opportunity cost to the huge investment in armaments, the technology, the brain power, the person power diverted to military purposes is also a huge infringement of SDG 16. So on the one hand, we're all in favor of peace. That's a kind of piety. But when you really dig into the politics of it, it's a very strong SDG, I think.
Yes, Mark, I agree there. I think it is probably the most fundamental one, because I do think it's a necessary prerequisite for any kind of meaningful moving forward, I think.